There is a particular kind of moment that arrives without announcing itself. Not a dramatic moment. Not a moment marked by thunder or crisis or the obvious machinery of historical rupture. A quiet moment. A moment that looks from the outside entirely ordinary. A moment in which someone is sitting exactly where you are sitting now, doing something that looks exactly like what you are doing now, and feeling beneath the surface of the ordinary something that resists the ordinary categories available for describing it. Not excitement, exactly. Not fear, exactly. Something that contains elements of both and reduces to neither. The particular sensation of standing at the edge of something whose scale you cannot yet fully perceive. The particular awareness that arrives not as a thought but as a quality of attention, a slight but unmistakable shift in the texture of consciousness, when something that was always there but always below the threshold of explicit recognition rises quietly and permanently into view. If you are feeling something like that now, as you encounter this specific arrangement of ideas at this specific moment in the unfolding of a history that neither of us fully understands and neither of us fully controls, then what you are feeling is not arbitrary. It is not the product of clever title design or sophisticated psychological triggering. It is the registration in the only instrument available for registering such things of something that is genuinely present in the actual conditions of the actual world you are actually living in. Something that Yuval Noah Harari has been describing with the particular combination of historical breadth and analytical precision and personal courage that distinguishes his work from almost everything else being said about the present moment, with increasing urgency and increasing specificity across the last several years. The recognition that humanity is not simply changing. It is about to change in a way that has no adequate precedent in the entirety of the human record. In a way that will make the distance between the world that exists now and the world that is coming greater than the distance between any two previous eras in human history that we have names for. In a way that will transform not merely the surface of how human beings live, but the depth of what human beings are. And the reason this video found you, in whatever sense a video finds the person who finds it, is not because you stumbled upon it accidentally. It is because you are a person who is at some level that may not be fully conscious but is entirely real, already aware that something is happening. Already aware that the ordinary categories available for making sense of daily life are straining under the pressure of something they were not designed to accommodate. Already aware that the story that civilization has been telling about where it is and where it is going is a story with a quality it did not have before. The quality of a story that may be approaching its final chapters, not in the apocalyptic sense of ending in catastrophe, but in the more vertiginous sense of reaching the boundary where the story as it has been told so far cannot continue in the form it has taken. Because what is coming next is something for which the existing narrative does not yet have the language, the categories, or the conceptual frameworks adequate to the reality it will be required to describe. This is what Harari means when he says humanity is about to change. Not that human beings will be different in the ways that each generation is different from the one that preceded it, the ways that feel significant from the inside of a single lifetime, but that, from the perspective of the long arc of human history, represent variations on themes that have been constant across the entirety of recorded civilization. He means something categorical, something that operates at the level of the fundamental conditions of what it means to be a human being. something that will make the lives of the people who inhabit the world that is coming, the world that is already forming at the edges of the world that currently exists, different not merely in degree, but in kind from the lives of every human being who has ever lived before the present moment. To understand what Harari is pointing toward requires understanding something about the structure of human history that most people, even people who have read extensively about that history, do not fully register in its implications. The structure is this. For the approximately 300,000 years that human beings as a biological species have existed on this planet, and for the approximately 10,000 years that something recognizable as human civilization has been developing within that larger biological history, the fundamental parameters of the human condition have remained constant. Not the surface features of human life, which have changed enormously from hunter-gatherer bands to agricultural villages to ancient empires to industrial democracies to the digitally networked civilization of the present moment. But the deep parameters, the biological parameters, the parameters of what a human being is at the level of the body that generates experience, the mind that processes it, the emotional architecture that gives it its particular quality of feeling, and the social nature that determines the forms of relationship within which human life has always been organized. These deep parameters have been constant across the full sweep of human history not because they could not, in principle, change, but because the mechanisms of change available to previous eras of human civilization were not powerful enough to alter them. The mechanisms available to previous civilizations were cultural, technological, and institutional. Cultures changed, technologies improved, institutions evolved, but the underlying biological substrate, the body, the brain, the nervous system, the genome that encodes the fundamental architecture of human nature remained outside the reach of any of these mechanisms. It changed only through the process that had always changed it, the glacially slow process of evolution by natural selection, operating across timescales of thousands to millions of years, producing changes too gradual to be perceptible within the span of any individual human life or any human civilization. This is why, despite the enormous diversity of human cultures and human experiences across the entire span of recorded history, a human being from ancient Mesopotamia and a human being from contemporary Tokyo are, in the deepest sense, the same kind of thing. Not the same in their beliefs, their values, their cultural practices, their understanding of themselves and the world, their material circumstances, or the specific quality of their daily experience, but the same in the fundamental parameters of what kind of being they are. Both have bodies subject to the same biological processes of growth, reproduction, disease, and death. Both have minds operating on the same basic cognitive architecture, generating experience through the same fundamental mechanisms of perception, memory, emotion, and reasoning. Both have the same basic social nature, requiring the same fundamental forms of relationship, belonging, and community. Both face the same fundamental existential conditions, the same mortality, the same capacity for suffering and joy, the same need for meaning and connection, the same confrontation with the mystery of consciousness and the finitude of individual life. This continuity of the deep parameters of the human condition across the entire span of human history is what makes human history legible across cultural distance. It is what allows the poetry of ancient Greece to move contemporary readers. What allows the philosophical insights of ancient India to remain relevant to contemporary questions. What allows the historical records of ancient Rome or medieval China or Renaissance Europe to illuminate something genuine about the human situation as it exists now. The surface features of each era are different enough to require interpretation and scholarship and the imaginative effort of historical understanding, but the deep substrate is constant enough that the fundamental human concerns, the concerns of meaning and mortality, love and loss, justice and power, individual dignity and collective obligation, remain recognizable and resonant across the entire span of the human record. Harari's central claim, the claim that gives this video its title and its particular quality of urgency, is that this continuity, this constancy of the deep parameters of the human condition that has persisted across the entire span of human civilization is about to be broken. Not gradually, over the millennia, that the evolutionary process requires to alter the biological substrate of what a species is, but within the span of decades, possibly within the span of years, certainly within the lifetimes of people who are currently alive and currently having the experience of reading these words. It is about to be broken because for the first time in the history of the species, the mechanisms of change available to human civilization have become powerful enough to alter not only the surface features of human life, but the deep parameters themselves, the biological parameters, the computational parameters, the existential parameters, the parameters of what a human body is, what a human mind is capable of, how long a human life can last, what forms of experience are available to a human consciousness, and what the relationship between human intelligence and the other forms of intelligence that human civilization has brought into existence actually is. There are several specific developments that Harari identifies as the primary drivers of this transformation, and understanding each of them and understanding how they interact and amplify each other is essential to understanding the scale and the character of what is actually coming. The first is artificial intelligence. And not artificial intelligence in the limited sense of specific tools that perform specific cognitive tasks more efficiently than human beings can perform them. That version of artificial intelligence has been developing for decades and has already produced significant economic and social effects without transforming the fundamental parameters of the human condition. The artificial intelligence that Harari is describing is something different in kind from what has come before. It is the emergence, for the first time in the history of the universe as far as we know, of a form of intelligence that is not biological in its substrate, not limited by the constraints of biological evolution in its rate of development, and not bounded by the specific cognitive architecture that biological evolution produced in Homo sapiens over the course of millions of years of adaptation to the specific demands of survival in the specific environments that our ancestors inhabited. This form of intelligence is not yet fully what it is becoming. The systems that exist today, impressive as they are in their ability to perform tasks that were until very recently assumed to require human-level intelligence, are early versions of something that is improving at a pace that no previous technology in human history has improved at, along dimensions that no previous technology has improved along, toward a capability that, when it arrives, will constitute a qualitative break from everything that has existed before it in the history of intelligence on this planet. The qualitative break is this. For the entirety of human history, human beings have been the most intelligent entities on Earth. Not the most powerful, not the most physically formidable, but the most intelligent in the specific sense of having the greatest capacity for the kind of general, flexible, open-ended cognitive processing that can be applied across the full range of domains of knowledge and action that a complex environment presents. This cognitive supremacy has been the foundation of every other form of human power, the basis of every technological achievement, the engine of every form of human civilization. It has been so consistent and so complete that it has been essentially invisible as a contingent feature of the human situation rather than a permanent one. Human beings have assumed their cognitive supremacy in the way that fish assume water. Not as a specific fact about the world that requires acknowledgement and could in principle be otherwise, but as the background condition of everything. Artificial intelligence is in the process of ending this background condition. Not immediately, not completely, not in all domains simultaneously, but in the trajectory of its development, measured over the timescale of years rather than centuries. The direction is clear and the destination, while not precisely specifiable, is not genuinely in doubt. A form of intelligence that is not biological, that can be copied indefinitely at near zero cost, that does not require food or sleep or emotional support or professional development or retirement benefits, that can process information at speeds and scales that no biological nervous system can match, that can improve itself in ways that no biological organism can improve itself, is a form of intelligence that will, within a time frame that no one can precisely specify but everyone seriously engaged with the evidence acknowledges is not geological, surpass human cognitive capability across most of the domains that have historically defined what human cognitive capability is most valuable for. This is not science fiction, it is the projection of current trends by the people who understand those trends most intimately, and its implications for the human condition are not minor adjustments to the surface features of human life. They are transformations of the deep parameters. When the most intelligent entities on Earth are no longer human, the relationship between human beings and the world they inhabit, the world that their intelligence has shaped and that has, in turn, shaped them, changes at the most fundamental level. The questions that have always defined the human relationship to power, to work, to meaning, to identity, to the future, the questions of what human beings are for, what human beings are best at, what human beings uniquely contribute to the systems of production and governance and culture that constitute civilization, all of these questions receive new and profoundly uncomfortable answers when the premise of human cognitive supremacy that has always underlain them is removed. The second development is biotechnology, and specifically the convergence of genetic engineering, synthetic biology, and the expanding capacity to understand and manipulate the biological processes that determine what kind of organism a human being is. For the entirety of human history, the biological parameters of human existence, what a human body can do, what a human brain can process, how long a human life can last, what diseases and disabilities the human organism is subject to, have been given rather than chosen. They have been the product of evolutionary processes that were entirely indifferent to human preferences and entirely beyond human control. Human civilization has spent the entirety of its existence working within these parameters, developing cultural, technological, and institutional responses to the constraints they impose, but never in a position to alter the constraints themselves. This is changing. The development of CRISPR gene editing technology and the rapid expansion of the biological knowledge that makes its precise application possible has, for the first time in the history of the species, placed in human hands the technical capacity to alter the biological parameters of what a human being is at the level of the genome that encodes them. The first applications of this technology have been in the domain of disease treatment, and the ability to eliminate heritable diseases that have caused immeasurable human suffering across generations represents a genuine and important moral achievement. But the logic of the technology does not stop at the boundary between disease elimination and enhancement. It does not have an inherent stopping point at which the capacity to alter the biological substrate of human nature exhausts itself. On the contrary, it opens a continuum of possible alterations that extends, in principle, from the elimination of specific disease-causing mutations all the way to the deliberate redesign of the cognitive, emotional, and physical parameters of what human beings are. The third development is the convergence of neurotechnology and digital connectivity, the developing capacity to interface the human brain directly with digital systems in ways that begin to blur the boundary between biological intelligence and artificial intelligence at the level of the individual human being. Brain-computer interface technology is currently in its early stages, limited in its bandwidth and its precision and its practical applicability to a relatively small range of clinical and experimental contexts. But its trajectory of development, like the trajectory of AI and biotechnology, is one of rapid improvement along dimensions that, extended over the timescale of decades, point toward a future in which the human brain is no longer necessarily a closed system isolated from the digital world by the barrier of its biological substrate, but a system that can be networked, enhanced, and in some meaningful sense merged with the digital systems that are simultaneously developing the capacity to replicate and exceed its native functions. The convergence of these three developments, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and neurotechnology, is what Harari means when he says that humanity is about to change in a way that has no precedent. Each of these developments is significant in isolation. Together, interacting and amplifying each other across the timescale of the next several decades, they represent the first genuine opportunity in human history to alter not merely the circumstances within which human beings live, but the fundamental nature of what human beings are. The first opportunity for the species to take the process of its own development out of the hands of blind evolutionary processes operating across geological timescales and into the hands of directed technological processes operating across human timescales. This opportunity is not coming. It is here. It is, in its early stages, already being acted upon, already producing the first effects of what will, in the course of the decades ahead, become the most significant transformation in the history of the species. And the specific character of this opportunity, the specific form that the transformation it enables is taking and will take, is something that every human being alive today has a stake in understanding, because every human being alive today is, whether they are aware of it or not, already participating in the process that is determining how this transformation unfolds. But Harari's analysis does not stop at the description of what is coming. Description alone, however precise, is not the most important thing he has to offer. The most important thing is the analysis of what this transformation means, what it means for the human beings who will live through it, what it means for the values and the institutions and the forms of life that human civilization has built over the course of its entire history. What it means for the questions of meaning, identity, freedom, equality, and justice that have always been the deepest concerns of the human tradition of reflection on what it means to live well, and what it requires from human beings individually and from human civilization collectively in the way of understanding, wisdom, and deliberate choice, if the transformation is to produce something genuinely better than what exists now, rather than something worse in ways that the present moment cannot yet fully perceive. The first thing the transformation means is the most immediately uncomfortable one. It means that the future will not be evenly distributed. The technologies that are in the process of altering the fundamental parameters of what a human being is are not neutral in their accessibility. They are expensive. They are available in their most powerful and most consequential forms, primarily to those who can pay for them. And the implications of this unequal accessibility extended across the time scale of decades in which these technologies are likely to become progressively more powerful and progressively more consequential in their effects on the life chances and the life quality of those who have access to them versus those who do not, are implications for human inequality of a scale and a character that makes every previous form of inequality in human history look, by comparison, relatively modest. Previous forms of human inequality were, ultimately, inequalities within a shared human nature. The rich and the poor, the powerful and the powerless, the educated and the uneducated of every previous era in human history were, beneath the enormous differences in their circumstances and their opportunities, the same kind of being. They shared the same biological substrate. They were subject to the same fundamental biological constraints, the same mortality, the same susceptibility to disease, the same cognitive architecture, the same emotional nature. The king and the peasant were both human in the same deep sense. Their circumstances were radically different. Their access to the benefits of civilization was radically unequal, but their fundamental natures were not. The inequality that biotechnology and related technologies are beginning to make possible is potentially of a different kind entirely. If the wealthy can afford genetic enhancements that improve the cognitive capacity of their children, while the poor cannot, the result over generations is not merely an inequality of circumstance, but an inequality of nature. Not merely a difference in what people have, but a difference in what people are. Not merely a widening of the gap between the advantaged and the disadvantaged within a shared human nature, but the potential emergence of genuinely different categories of human being, different in their biological capacities in ways that have no precedent in the history of a species that, across all its cultural diversity, has always shared a common biological nature. Harari describes this possibility with a directness that most political and institutional discourse has been reluctant to match. The emergence of biological castes. Not castes defined by birth in the traditional sense of social categories maintained by cultural convention and legal enforcement, but castes defined by the actual biological capacities that different levels of access to enhancement technologies produce. A world in which the children of the wealthy are, in the most literal biological sense, more capable than the children of the poor, not because of better nutrition or better education or better opportunity, though all of these factors will amplify the effect, but because their genome has been engineered by the best available biotechnology that wealth can purchase, to give them advantages that no amount of effort or aspiration or social mobility can compensate for. This is not a distant hypothetical. The technologies required to begin this process are already in existence, already in use in their early forms, already being improved at a pace that makes their more powerful future applications a matter of when rather than whether, and the social and political systems that would need to regulate and constrain these technologies to ensure that their development serves the common human good rather than exacerbating the already extraordinary inequalities of the present moment are not currently adequate to the task. They are not designed for it. They were built to govern a world in which the fundamental parameters of human nature were given and shared, and they have no established frameworks for governing a world in which those parameters become variable and purchasable. The second thing the transformation means is perhaps even more profound in its implications. It means that the questions of identity and meaning that have always been central to the human tradition of reflection on what it means to live well are about to become both more urgent and more difficult to answer than they have ever been before, because these questions, in all the forms they have taken across the full diversity of human culture and human philosophy and human religious tradition, have always been asked and answered against the background of a fixed human nature, the nature that evolution produced, the nature that all human beings share, the nature that provides the common ground on which all the cultural diversity of human civilization rests. When that background of fixed shared human nature begins to be altered, when the biological parameters of what a human being is become variable rather than given, the questions of identity and meaning cannot continue to be asked and answered in the same way. What does it mean to be human when the biological definition of human is no longer fixed? What does it mean to live a good human life when the nature that has always defined the possibilities and the constraints of human life is being rewritten? What does it mean to be a self when the self's biological substrate, the brain and the body that generate the experience of selfhood, can be deliberately altered by technologies whose effects on the quality and the character of the resulting experience are not yet fully understood? These are not merely philosophical questions in the abstract academic sense. They are questions that real human beings will be confronting in the most immediate and most personal sense as the technologies that are raising them become more powerful, more available, and more consequential in their actual effects on actual human lives. And they are questions for which the inherited traditions of human wisdom, the philosophical traditions, the religious traditions, the cultural traditions that have provided frameworks for the navigation of the deepest questions of human existence across the entirety of recorded civilization do not have fully adequate answers. Because those traditions were developed in and for a world in which the parameters of human nature were fixed. A world in which the question of what it means to be human had a biological answer that, however much it might be elaborated and interpreted and given different cultural expressions, was ultimately given rather than chosen. In the world that is coming, that answer will no longer be simply given. It will be, in significant part, a matter of choice and design and economic access. And the human traditions of wisdom that are required to navigate that world well will have to be developed to a significant extent in the process of navigating it, without the precedents and the frameworks that have supported every previous navigation of the deepest human questions. The third thing the transformation means is a specific challenge to the political and institutional frameworks that human civilization has built over the course of the last several centuries. The challenge of governing the development and the deployment of technologies whose power exceeds the capacity of any existing governance framework to manage, whose rate of development exceeds the capacity of any existing regulatory process to keep up with, and whose implications for the fundamental questions of justice, equality, freedom, and human dignity that political institutions exist to address exceed the conceptual frameworks within which those institutions were built to operate. Harari has been consistent and explicit in his concern about this governance gap. The democratic institutions of the contemporary world were designed for a world in which the most significant sources of power were territorial, military, and economic. A world in which the questions of justice and equality that political institutions were required to address were questions about the distribution of external goods and external opportunities among human beings who shared a common biological nature and a common set of fundamental human capacities. A world in which the most dangerous concentrations of power were concentrations of physical force, economic resources, or political authority, and in which the mechanisms of democratic accountability and constitutional constraint that liberal political theory developed were adequate to the task of preventing those concentrations from becoming permanently and irresistibly dominant. The world that is coming presents concentrations of power of a different kind and a different scale. The concentration of power in the hands of those who control the most advanced AI systems. The concentration of power in the hands of those who control the most advanced biotechnology. The concentration of power in the hands of those who control the most comprehensive data about the internal states, the preferences, the behavioral patterns, and the cognitive and emotional vulnerabilities of the largest number of human beings. These concentrations of power are not merely economic or military or political in the traditional senses of those terms. They are, potentially, concentrations of power over the fundamental parameters of what human beings are and what human beings can do and what human beings want and believe and value. Concentrations of power, in other words, over the basic conditions of human freedom itself. The democratic institutions and the constitutional frameworks that human civilization has built to prevent any single entity from accumulating power sufficient to permanently dominate the rest of humanity were not designed to address concentrations of power of this kind. They were designed for a world in which the most dangerous powers were military and economic. The power to alter the human genome. The power to shape human consciousness through the management of information environments. The power to predict and influence human behavior through the analysis of behavioral data. The power to develop artificial intelligence systems that surpass human cognitive capacity across an expanding range of domains. These forms of power were not in the political imagination of the founders of the democratic tradition, and their absence from that imagination means that the institutional frameworks those founders developed do not have adequate built-in mechanisms for preventing their accumulation in the hands of whatever entities, public or private, are best positioned to develop them. Harari's concern is not that the development of these technologies is inherently malign or that the entities developing them are motivated by the desire for domination. His concern is structural. It is the concern of a historian who has studied the full range of human attempts to organize power and has observed with consistent regularity across all of those attempts the tendency of power to accumulate in ways that were not foreseen by the people who created the conditions that allowed the accumulation to occur. The tendency of technological capabilities developed for benign purposes to be applied to purposes of control and domination by whoever controls them. The tendency of the institutions built to govern power to be captured by the power they were built to govern. Not because the people involved are worse than other human beings, because the structural dynamics of power are more consistent than the moral intentions of the people who exercise it. The fourth thing the transformation means concerns the specific human beings who will live through it, not the transformation in the abstract, not the civilizational dynamics in the large. The individual human beings, people like you and people like the people you love and the people you encounter in the ordinary fabric of your daily life, who are going to be the subjects of the most significant transformation in the history of the species, who are going to have to navigate its implications without adequate precedent, without adequate institutional support, and without adequate wisdom traditions fully calibrated to the specific challenges it presents. What will it be like, from the inside of an individual human life, to live through the transformation that is coming? Not in the statistical aggregate, not in the terms of economic models, or sociological analyses, or political assessments. in the first-person, irreducibly subjective sense of what it will feel like to be a specific human being navigating a world that is changing in the most fundamental possible ways, faster than any previous generation of human beings has ever had to navigate change. It will feel, Harari suggests, like the specific form of disorientation that comes when the frameworks that have been providing the experience of orientation, the sense of knowing where one is and what one's life is about and what matters and what does not, turn out to be frameworks that were calibrated for a world that no longer quite exists. The disorientation of the person whose professional identity has been built around skills that AI systems are now performing more efficiently. The disorientation of the person whose social identity has been built around a set of values and a set of assumptions about human nature and human possibility that the developments of biotechnology are beginning to call into question. The disorientation of the person who has built their sense of meaning and purpose on frameworks that were developed for a world with fixed parameters, attempting to navigate a world in which the parameters themselves are becoming variable. This disorientation is not a sign of personal failure. It is the rational response of a human consciousness calibrated by evolution and culture for a world of relatively gradual change, confronting a world of change that is occurring faster than any previous calibration adequately prepared it for. And the appropriate response to it is not the response that most of the systems and institutions of the contemporary world are inclined to offer. Not the response of more information, not the response of better cognitive frameworks, not the response of more efficient adaptation to the demands of the changing world. The appropriate response, the one that Harari's work consistently points toward as the most genuinely necessary and the most genuinely rare quality that the present moment requires, is the response of deeper consciousness, of a quality of awareness adequate to the scale of what is actually happening. What does this mean in practice? It means, first, the willingness to actually see what is happening rather than the more comfortable alternative of seeing what one's preferred frameworks of interpretation suggest should be happening. The developments that are transforming the fundamental parameters of human existence are not obscure. They are being reported, discussed, and debated in every major forum of public discourse. The information is available. What is not available for most people, most of the time, is the quality of attention required to actually receive that information in its full implications rather than processing it through the filters of normalization and denial and the various forms of comfortable incomprehension that the mind deploys to manage information whose implications it is not yet ready to integrate. The willingness to see clearly, to maintain the quality of attention required to actually perceive what is actually happening without the protective distortion of the frameworks that make it more comfortable but less accurate, is the first and most fundamental requirement of genuine intelligence in the present moment. And it is, in the conditions of the present environment, genuinely countercultural, because the environment is not designed to support this quality of seeing. It is designed, with extraordinary sophistication, to provide comfortable substitutes for it. The infinite availability of content that addresses the surface of the changes occurring without confronting their depth. The social media ecosystem that provides the feeling of being informed and engaged without requiring the quality of sustained, deep, genuinely uncomfortable attention that actually being informed and actually engaged in the sense that the present moment requires demands. The second practical implication is the cultivation of the specific internal qualities that the navigation of genuine uncertainty, genuine novelty, and genuine transformation requires. Because the world that is coming will not be navigable through the application of maps drawn for the world that existed before it. It will require the internal qualities that allow navigation without adequate maps. The quality of genuine groundedness in one's own experience. The capacity to maintain a stable relationship with one's own values and one's own perception of reality in the absence of the external frameworks of certainty that previous eras provided. The quality of genuine openness to the new, the willingness to encounter genuinely unprecedented forms of human experience without immediately forcing them into the categories developed for the experience that preceded them. The quality of genuine wisdom. The capacity to make good judgments about genuinely difficult questions in the absence of the precedents and the established frameworks that make judgment easier and less demanding, but also less genuine. These qualities are not given. They are not automatic. They are not the product of good intentions or good information or the right philosophical framework adopted at the right moment. They are developed through the specific and demanding work of actually attending to one's own experience with the honesty and the depth and the sustained commitment that their development requires. The work that the contemplative traditions of human history have described, each in their own terms and with their own cultural elaborations, as the central work of what it means to actually live a human life, rather than simply to undergo one. The third practical implication is perhaps the most important one, and the one that Harari returns to with the most consistency and the most urgency across all the different contexts in which he addresses the question of what the transformation that is coming requires from the human beings who will live through it. It is the implication of genuine human connection, of the specific quality of relationship between human beings, the quality of actually knowing and being known by other people, of actually caring and being cared for in the full sense of those words, of actually belonging to something together in the way that genuine community creates belonging, that no technology, however sophisticated, can replicate or replace. The transformation that is coming will create pressures on human connection that are already visible in their early forms in the conditions of the present moment. The pressure of AI systems that simulate connection with sufficient sophistication to satisfy the surface requirements of the experience while providing none of its actual substance. The pressure of digital social environments that multiply the quantity of human contact while systematically undermining the quality of the attention and the presence and the genuine mutual engagement that make contact into connection. The pressure of a world changing so fast that the shared frameworks of meaning and value and experience that genuine connection between people depends on are harder to maintain across the generational and cultural gaps that rapid transformation creates. Against these pressures, the cultivation of genuine human connection, the deliberate, sustained, countercultural investment in the specific forms of relationship and community that the digital substitutes for connection are not providing is not merely a personal good. It is a political and civilizational necessity. The specific capacity of human beings to actually be with each other, to actually understand each other, to actually care about each other in the full sense of those words, is the capacity that is most directly threatened by the developments that are transforming the human condition and the capacity whose loss would be most consequential for the possibility of a future that is genuinely human in the deepest sense of that term. This brings the analysis to the most important question of all, not what is coming, which can be described with varying degrees of precision, but what it requires from us. From the specific, irreducibly particular human beings who are alive at this specific moment in the most consequential period in the history of the species. What we are required to be and to do and to care about and to refuse and to protect in the face of a transformation whose scale exceeds any previous human experience and whose outcomes remain genuinely open, genuinely undetermined, genuinely dependent on the quality of the consciousness and the wisdom and the choices that the human beings navigating it bring to the navigation. What it requires first is the willingness to actually be present to the moment, to actually inhabit the specific historical position that the accident of birth has placed each of us in, which is the most consequential position any human being has ever occupied in the history of the species. The position of being alive at the moment when the fundamental parameters of the human condition are being transformed for the first time. The position of being among the last generation that will know human life in its pre-transformation form, and the first generation that will shape the conditions under which the transformation occurs. The position, in other words, of genuine and unprecedented historical responsibility. The responsibility not merely to navigate the transformation, but to shape it. Not merely to respond to what the systems of technology and economy and political power are producing, but to determine through the quality of the attention and the wisdom and the choice that we bring to the engagement, what those systems actually produce and what it actually means. What it requires, second, is the willingness to hold complexity, to resist the appeal of simple answers to questions of extraordinary complexity, to resist the narratives on every side of every debate about the future that promise to reduce the genuine difficulty of the choices that the transformation presents to formulas simple enough to be comforting and clear enough to feel like certainty. The transformation that is coming is not going to be navigated well by people who have simple frameworks for understanding it. It is going to be navigated well, to the extent that it is navigated well at all, by people who can hold its genuine complexity with the patience and the honesty and the tolerance for uncertainty that genuine complexity requires. What it requires, third, is the cultivation of genuine wisdom, not information, of which there is an extraordinary and growing surplus, not intelligence in the narrow cognitive sense, of which there will shortly be a non-human alternative of greater speed and greater scale than biological intelligence can produce, but wisdom, the specific, irreducibly human capacity to apply understanding to judgment, knowledge to choice, awareness to action in ways that take into account not merely what is technically possible or economically efficient or strategically advantageous, but what is genuinely good, what actually serves the flourishing of human beings and the other conscious beings with whom human beings share this planet. What is worth preserving from the human inheritance that is about to be transformed? And what is worth creating out of the extraordinary possibilities that the transformation makes available that would be genuinely better rather than merely different? What it requires, fourth, is the specific courage that genuine responsibility in the face of genuine uncertainty demands. The courage to act on values and judgments that cannot be proven correct in advance of the actions they motivate. The courage to resist the systems and the pressures and the incentives that are pushing the transformation in directions that the evidence of human values and human wisdom suggests are not the best directions. The courage to say, in the face of the extraordinary seductiveness of the technological possibilities that are becoming available, not everything that is possible is desirable. Not everything that is efficient is good. Not everything that can be optimized should be. This courage is not the courage of dramatic confrontation or heroic sacrifice. It is the quieter and more demanding courage of maintaining genuine values, genuine relationships, genuine attention to what actually matters in human life, in conditions specifically designed to make the maintenance of all of these things as difficult and as inconvenient as possible. The courage of choosing depth over efficiency, quality over speed, genuine connection over the comfortable simulation of connection, and the difficult truth over the comfortable story. In a world that is offering the comfortable story with increasing sophistication and increasing persuasiveness, this is not a small courage, it is perhaps the specific courage that the present moment most requires. You are watching this video at a specific moment in the history of the species, a moment that will be remembered if the civilization that is forming has enough continuity with the one that currently exists to remember anything as the moment when the transformation began, when the fundamental parameters of the human condition began to change. When the questions that had been constants of the human situation, the questions every human being had always had to face and that every human tradition of wisdom had developed responses to, began to be answered differently because the conditions that had always generated them were beginning to be altered. You are not watching this video by accident. In whatever sense that is true, it is true. You are a human being alive at this moment, and this moment is asking something specific of you. Not the dramatic something of revolutionary action or historical heroism. The quieter, more demanding, more continuous something of genuine attention, genuine presence, genuine willingness to actually inhabit the moment you are in, with all the uncertainty and all the complexity and all the weight of responsibility that it carries, rather than managing it from the safe distance of comfortable incomprehension. Harari's work, at its most important, is not finally about the future of artificial intelligence or the implications of biotechnology or the governance challenges of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, though it is genuinely and importantly about all of these things. It is about the quality of consciousness that the present moment requires of the human beings who are alive in it. The consciousness that actually sees rather than the one that processes the appearance of seeing. The consciousness that actually cares rather than the one that performs the appearance of caring. the consciousness that is actually present to the specific, irreplaceable, never-to-be-repeated moment of being alive in this particular extraordinary juncture in the history of the species, rather than the one that is somewhere else, in the managed past or the anxious future or the algorithmically curated emotional state, while the moment that actually requires its presence passes unattended. Humanity is about to change. The change is real. Its scale is unprecedented. Its implications extend to the most fundamental questions of what it means to be human, and its outcomes depend, more than any deterministic account of technological or economic forces suggests, on the quality of the consciousness, the wisdom, and the genuine human care that the people navigating it, the people who are alive right now, in this extraordinary and terrifying and genuinely unprecedented moment, bring to the navigation. That is you. You are the people who are alive right now. You are navigating this. The question is not whether the navigation will happen. The question is what quality of consciousness you will bring to it. And the answer to that question, in whatever measure it is actually a question, rather than simply a determination made by forces larger than any individual, begins in the specific quality of attention you are able to bring to the moment you are actually in, right now, as you encounter these ideas, in whatever degree of genuine openness and genuine willingness to be changed by what is genuinely true that you are able to bring to the encounter. This is what it means that this video chose you. Not that you were selected by an algorithm for demographic targeting, though that is also true, but that you are a human being alive at the most consequential moment in the history of your species, reading these words with whatever quality of attention you are reading them with, and that the moment is asking something of that attention, something specific, something real, something that will matter in ways that extend beyond this moment and beyond your individual life, in the ways that the choices made by the people alive at genuinely consequential historical moments always matter. Whether or not those people understood the full implications of what they were choosing, whether or not they felt adequate to the weight of what was being asked of them, whether or not they were, as you may or may not feel yourself to be, ready. The readiness is not a prerequisite. The moment does not wait for readiness. The moment is here. And so, if you are willing, are you?